What's crack-a-lackin', my peoples? I'm Jerry Quickley, and this is happening. Couldn't be happy that you're joining us today because we are going to have a discussion live in studio with journalist Ruben Luengas about exactly what's going on in Mexico in terms of their upcoming elections. It looks like, loosely translated, the Mexican version of Bernie Sanders is winning by a 2-to-1 ratio. We're going to be seeing exactly what's going on in elections south of the border. All that and more. And later on, we'll be taking your calls. But first up, you know how we do. Let's get down with National Native News.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. A bipartisan group of federal lawmakers has introduced legislation to protect the marijuana industry for tribes. Matt Laszlo has the story from Washington.
Colorado Republican Senator Cory Gardner is teaming up with Massachusetts Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren to try to protect marijuana businesses in states and on reservations where it's locally legal. Warren says it's time for Congress to catch up.
In fact, 46 states, the District of Columbia, 2 territories, and a number of tribes have legalized marijuana in some form. They've taken action, and the law on their books should be protected.
While Attorney General Jeff Sessions opposes marijuana, Senator Gardner says President Trump is on board with their effort.
I've talked to the president about this bill. I think in the previous conversation we had, he talked about the need to solve this conflict between state and federal law. He talked about his support for a states' rights approach during the campaign. He's talked about that in the days since with me.
Warren says Sessions' request to prosecute legal marijuana business owners backfired.
I think it's the Attorney General who gave us the impetus to bring our colleagues together to change the law in this area. When the Attorney General said that he was going to start enforcing federal laws in places like Massachusetts that had just overturned the prohibition on marijuana, it spurred us to more immediate action.
It's unclear if or when their bill may get a vote. For National Native News, I'm Matt Laszlo in Washington.
Tribes and their allies are pushing for measures that serve Indian country to be included in the Farm Bill. The Senate Committee on Agriculture is expected to mark up the bill Wednesday. The legislation impacts policies in a number of areas, such as nutrition programs, agriculture, food production, and rural development. Those advocating for Indian country say too often the needs of tribes are left out. Some key provisions in the bill involve insurance, conservation, education, and the creation of a tribal advisory committee to identify issues with tribal USDA programs. The Native Farm Bill Coalition, a group of more than 160 tribes and allies, say the bill is a good start, but additional provisions are still needed for Indian country. The National Park Service has announced $60 million in historic preservation grants to states and tribes. KLCC's Brian Bull reports.
7 Oregon tribes are sharing nearly $500,000. The Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde are using their money to maintain archaeological staff and projects. Cultural Resources Manager David Harrelson says it's another form of self-governance.
So as opposed to having the federal government do that work on tribal lands, the tribe does it ourselves.
And Cassandra Rippey, the Coquille Tribe's Historic Preservation Officer, says their share will help language revitalization, surveys of development sites, and enforcement of Oregon Senate Bill 144, which went into effect this year.
That bill prohibits the collection of archaeological material on public lands. Everybody wants a little piece of history. People tend to not think of the fact that if I take one piece and Jim takes one piece and Sally takes one piece, we're all taking something home, and all together we're going to lose that entire site.
Congress appropriates the grants every year. For National Native News, I'm Brian Bull.
The Navajo Nation is remembering the life of Navajo code talker Samuel Tom Holliday. He passed away in Utah this week at age 94. Holliday is being remembered for his service in World War II. He received a Congressional Silver Medal and a Purple Heart for his service. Funeral arrangements are still being planned. I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
What's up? What's going on? What's crack-a-lackin', my peoples? I'm Jerry Quickley, and this is happening. there is a dumpster fire happening on our southern border now. In fact, I would call it a show. The reason I call it a show is because that's exactly what it is. But today, we're not even going to talk about the horrors that are being visited upon Mexican families and stripping of young brown children away from their mothers and fathers in an effort to punish them. The only reason it's happening is so white supremacists cheer. But today, we're shifting our focus from the border to Mexico City and the rest of the country, because today we're going to be talking about the front runner in the elections, which are happening at the end of the month, July 1st, I believe. And the front runner is, in the latest polling, is a man dubbed the Bernie Sanders of Mexico. At least he is dubbed that north of the border. Manuel Lopez Obrador, or AMLO as he is known. He's actually a far-left populist who placed second in the two previous presidential elections. Lopez Obrador's platform includes a call for the United Nations to stop American President Donald Trump from building a border wall. He also plans to break up corporate monopolies. He's threatening oil companies, and he's just all around basically threatening to topple over the capitalist, well-prepared, curated table. Joining us today to discuss exactly what's going on with AMLO and the Mexican elections, I'm super happy to welcome to the show, live in studio, Ruben Luengas, host of Contra Golpe and Entre Noticias. I hope I didn't mispronounce.
No, I am very happy, Yuri. Thank you for inviting me. I want to say sorry for my English because it's not really very good, but I will try to do my best.
Thank you.
To express best ideas about what's going on in Mexico.
Ruben, you heard my kind of rambling intro here with AMLO. What important points about this upcoming election, where AMLO is far and ahead leading the other presidential candidates in Mexico right now, what didn't I cover that American audiences need to know? Well,
first, I would like to say that Andrés Manuel López Obrador, in the first chance he had to become president, 2006, there was a fraud. There was a fraud against Andrés Manuel López Obrador. In Mexico, it is illegal that the president is taking part of the election. The president in Mexico has to be outside the competition, the election. And Vicente Fox was the president, and he was doing all he can to avoid Andrés Manuel López Obrador to become president. So it was a fraud in that election, 2006. And then many people was really very upset. But then Felipe Calderón, the so-called winner of the election, arrived to the presidency and started to set up a war against narcotraffic. And it's been horrible because the violence in Mexico started to grow up a lot, to grow up a lot, with many people killing and with different cartels fighting. But there was a theory that the government was protecting one cartel and fighting another kind of cartel. So this situation now in Mexico is a huge crisis of human rights because there are many people disappearing, there are many people being killed, there are many journalists being killed, and even candidates now. In this election, in the process of this election, there are very close to 30 candidates killed in Mexico. A candidate from Coahuila, Piedras Negras, in the north of the country, he was after a debate. Suddenly, a man came with a gun, put the gun in his head, shoot in his head. He was killed just last Friday. So, but about Andrés Manuel López Obrador, they don't want Andrés Manuel López Obrador to become president. Who are they? The system. So we have PRI, the official party right now, and the PAN, who was...
PRI is the official party that leads, that's in power now in Mexico. PRI.
Is in power now, yes. And used to be before 12 years of PAN when Vicente Fox in 2000, when he became president, Vicente Fox. But the reality, and we believe that in Mexico, is that PRI and PAN really represent the same. What is the same? Neoliberalism. This politics of neoliberalism. And with the president now, Enrique Peña Nieto, who is in power, we have the so-called reformas estructurales, so changes about issues like energy, education, but in the sector of energy, so Mexico just give away the industry of oil industry. No, so I don't know if that responds your question.
No, that's an excellent
and Andrés
response.
Manuel López Obrador, AMLO, is against that. So that's why right now there are many people even afraid about something like maybe someone trying to kill Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who is leading. He's leading all the polls.
And for folks who may not be clear on exactly what the threat is against AMLO, the New York Times wrote just this past April, on April 26th, that in addition to threatening refinery profits in the United States, his proposals could slow oil production in Texas and impede deepwater drilling in the Gulf of Mexico by international giants like Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron. They would also jeopardize the United States energy trade surplus with Mexico, which reached roughly $15 billion last year. So truly, I mean, to put it into context, if you are a presidential candidate of a petroleum-producing next-door neighbor and you are perceived as hostile by big oil in America, this is, I mention that to set the background because this is a first, is it not? Big oil has never been as scared and fearful as they are right now of the possibility of Obregón winning.
So he's receiving pressure from people like Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, who is the son of the president that in the 30s nationalized the oil industry in Mexico, Lázaro Cárdenas. Mm-hmm. Now, his son, Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, is saying he was president candidate 3 times, Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, and he's telling, okay, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, I vote for you if you really make a commitment to rescue the oil industry for Mexico. So that is really very hard for him because even if Andrés Manuel López Obrador is thinking about that possibility, he knows that now everything is set up after this government, and in this case, he would have to fight against all these corporations from the United States who are there already in Mexico, and from Europe and other owned by private sectors in Mexico. So it's really a very huge challenge. But he wants to build refinerías in Mexico to produce gasoline in Mexico, because now Mexico forgot about refinerías, and it's like he gives this example. So we have oranges, but we are just importing orange juice from the United States. So it's crazy. Right. Let's use our oranges to produce our own juice.
Right.
So that makes sense, right?
Yes.
So, but many people, they say, oh, no, you cannot do that. So there are, the elite in Mexico, it's against this situation because they lead the country to this complex situation right now.
No, you dirty
oil.
Campesino, you don't understand. This is oil, not oranges.
Yes?
This is the arrogance of the elites.
Another important issue is NAFTA. You know, now with Donald Trump put in check, like using this word of chess, right? In check?
Yes, check, exactly.
So put in check Mexican government. Now, okay, you gave me already the oil, you gave me many things, but now I don't want NAFTA. Even if NAFTA was something imposed on Mexico, and the president Carlos Salinas de Gortari back in 1988, he accepted all this and he signs the free trade agreement with Mexico. I mean, with the United States. Suddenly they changed the situation, and López Obrador is the only one who is saying, well, it's not a fatality. In Mexico has no NAFTA. It's not the end of the country. Right. Maybe that could be a new possibility. He's saying to create our own products that we are consuming every day in Mexico instead of just importing fruit from the United States or those kind of things.
Now, I want to remind our listeners that my guest today is Ruben Luengas, host of Contragolpe and Entre Noticias. And we're discussing the Mexican elections. Ruben, you mentioned the signing of NAFTA in 1988 by the new president. I want to tie that into a comment you made earlier about Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas.
Cárdenas, yeah.
Yes. He ran for president in 1988.
Yeah, three times. Three times.
And in 88, the machines were adding the votes. He's well in the lead. And then suddenly the government claims, oh, the
Yes.
system crashed,
Exactly,
and the votes were counted by some other method, and they told Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, no, you didn't win. It's this other guy who then signs NAFTA.
Exactly. After that situation of the system, and by the way, who was the Minister of Governance
Yes.
in Mexico, now is with López Obrador.
Wow.
He's with López Obrador.
It's like musical chairs, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know if they have that game in
It's
Mexico.
really
but
very
where you
weird.
got a birthday party with the kids. They all change musical
that was
chairs.
1988 with Carlos Salinas de Gortari. It was a huge scandal in Mexico. It was a fraud, of course, and that's the way Carlos Salinas became the president, and he is the one who with Mr. Bush, who was just impulsando, how to say impulsando, just trying
Impulsando?
to
Moving forward, pushing forward.
pushing for NAFTA.
Right.
NAFTA. And then here in the United States, NAFTA was for two parties, Democrats. Clinton was supporting NAFTA, was no Republican, only with Mr. Bush.
Yeah.
So that's why now it's really very important, because Mexico has been in this system in many years. And suddenly to change that, if suddenly Mr. Trump said, forget about it, we are in trouble. We are in trouble. We have to try to do something different in this moment. But you told me about this fraud, Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas. Yes, was a huge scandal. And then 2006 with AMLO again, with Calderón.
So they stole the election from AMLO in 2006.
No, and now,
And now they
are selling votes. They are giving people, okay, give me your identification to vote. You can give me that, and we can give you money. And they are doing that because the government and the official candidate is José Antonio Meade of the PRI. They are really very concerned about giving the power to this Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who is promising to change many things in Mexico. He used a very interesting a phrase. He said, por el bien de todos, primero los pobres. Por el bien de todos, primero los pobres. For the good of everyone, first poor people.
First the poor. For the good of everyone, first the poor.
First the poor. Oh, that's a scandal for the Mexican elite who has in control of mass media, all this business. I asked once, I interviewed Barack Obama, and I told, he was candidate, Barack Obama here, and I told him, hey, you are telling me about immigrants. All the problem on Mexicans coming to the United States. But you must know the aftermath, the effects of NAFTA in Mexico. It's very good for the corporations, but it's been really very bad for the Mexican people. He told me, oh, yes, and if I became president, I'm going to change that. He didn't change anything. He was in the same path. So
same path. So Barack Obama shut down, had no spine against the capitalists who have such a big influence on Mexican and on NAFTA, and really the revenue streams that have been created. And what NAFTA essentially did was to encode and create a protected superstructure through which these revenue streams will continue to pass for many years to come. And now Trump is threatening to destroy that and upset it. Yeah. But I'm also interested in that's happening at the same moment that AMLO, it looks like he's well, tell our audience, how far ahead is AMLO at this moment, and why is everyone so scared? Why is everyone so concerned that he will win? Because, I mean, there's still 2 weeks left.
Well, every important poll in Mexico now is giving the election for Andrés Manuel López Obrador for the double of intention in the vote. Wow. For the double. So it's like if he was in a competition of the Formula 1, and he's just...
He'll have more votes. He'll have twice as many votes as his next closest competitor.
Exactly. So people are saying, so the only possibility is that he crash. Right. He crash in the competition, or that someone is trying to do something dirty in order to get that he crash.
In America, it would be like Bernie Sanders having 70% of the vote and Trump having 30% of the
Exactly.
vote 2 weeks before the election.
Exactly. So, but now they are starting to create a so-called public opinion. Oh, the polls are not really very
you can't believe your lying
You
eyes.
can't believe the polls. Some mass media are trying to create that. So we are still afraid in Mexico that in these 2 weeks, and now especially that is coming also the soccer championship in Russia, something might happen.
Right, where their focus is overseas on the matches.
Even something like, suddenly he crashed in a highway. He was in... we are afraid about that. We are afraid. Because these...
So you're concerned about the physical safety of the candidate himself?
Yes, I am concerned. And he didn't accept the protection of the so-called Estado Mayor Presidencial. He didn't accept the official government protection of soldiers and those kind of things. So he's just moving like that. He said,
walking around the streets like you or me.
Yeah. So that's really very dangerous. There are many people asking his party, please take care of this guy, because there are many people in the government that are afraid that they could be in jail if Andrés Manuel López Obrador, even if he's promising, I don't want revenge, I want just justice, peace and love, these kind of things he's saying about.
But even because the U.S.-driven cartel violence in Mexico is at such a height, and because it's a machine that creates armies of soldiers to eat the young, this machine has so many soldiers and is building so many soldiers, and the machine is so big, it is difficult to imagine you couldn't find someone who, for a relatively small amount of money, would, commit virtually any act of violence, including against someone like AMLO. In a country so besieged by U.S.-driven violence, it seems that would, in fact, put an unprotected presidential candidate at even greater risk.
Yeah. He said, we need to start doing something in Mexico that many people don't believe is going to work. But he said, I'm going to start really to change all this violence and to change that people is recluded by the narcotraffic and the crime. We need really to give jobs. We really need to change that poverty. That poverty is not the same of being criminal, but it is the caldo de cultivo, or is the context where is able to invite people, come here, because now with NAFTA, the countryside in Mexico, the campesinos, they really they put in a very difficult situation. We are between narcotraffic or unemployment, because NAFTA changed completely the situation in the makes sense what I am saying?
Yes,
in the working, in the making apples and those kind of things. So we need really to concentrate in attack poverty in Mexico, like the first step really to change the country. Of course, that is not possible only in 6 years. That is the time that is an administration in Mexico. But someone has to give the first step for doing that. And according to López Obrador, he is promising really to give important steps in that direction.
And someone has to recognize the definitive linkage that exists between poverty and violence.
Exactly.
Poverty is violent.
Exactly. In itself is violence. Exactly. And in addition to that, we really need to create a real educational reform, because now they are speaking about a reform, educational reform, but it's a reform to capacitate people for neoliberalism, for the so-called globalization. Right. And Andrés Manuel López Obrador said, we really need another concept of education, from the inside to the outside, instead of from the outside to the inside. That reminds me this very famous what's the name? Paulo Freire from Brazil, you remember?
Yes.
Educación como práctica de la libertad, education as practice of liberty.
Right.
We need a concept in Mexico not to be an island from the world, but to really understand first the situation within the country, not just the elite. Hey, we need to be like the United States. We need to be in globalization. We need to be vanguardistic.
Right.
No, we really need to think about the millions of people that in Mexico still are in poverty.
Right. It's interesting that I want to remind our listeners, my guest today is Ruben Luengas, host of Contragolpe and Entre Noticias. And we're discussing the Mexican elections. Interesting that you mentioned Paulo Freire.
Paulo Freire, yeah.
Yeah, because it's in the U.S. we have a hard time imagining significant or groundbreaking political change that involves anyone other than a politician. There's no culture workers, no aesthetic workers, no we believe that somehow we're going to the only class that can inspire massive change broadly in America is politicians. There's no room for the culture makers. There's no room for the artists. There's no room for the philosophers. And just you mentioning Pablo makes me think that there's a different posture and a different take or a different leaning in Mexico, at least in this election. Is that analysis off the mark?
Well, no, not really. But we have the hope that with Andrés Manuel López Obrador, we could rescue those concepts to really apply them in the everyday, in the Mexican society. Because now we have this mass media communication, television. It's horrible, television in Mexico, really. It's horrible as well here, to be honest with you.
Of course.
So, but what's going on there in Mexico? And if you really, for instance, I want to give you an example. Once here in the United States, in Los Angeles, I saw in the LA Times, I saw the boys to watch. They were talking about Mexican singer Rolando Villazón. Plácido Domingo, he used to say, hey, what's up, Rolando Villazón? So I saw that. It was Romeo and Juliet in the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion here in LA. So I told my news director, I was just working in Telemundo, Channel 52. Then, you see, this Mexican singer is coming to... Are you crazy? We are in sweeps. And you want to make a story about opera. Are you crazy? Wow. So I told him, give me the chance. So he gave me the chance. I made a story. And, of course, with the promotion, no? Hey, don't miss, it's the Mexican singer, blah, blah, blah. So next day, the news director make a joke. So they called me to the office, and he was apparently really very upset with papers of the rating. He threw up. Not threw up. Come say?
Threw them down.
Sorry for that.
Threw the papers down in front of him.
It was kind of the same. And he said, hey, you see the ratings. And I saw, I got really very embarrassed. So the ratings double, higher. Wow. And when I went to the Opera Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, families from El Salvador, Mexican, another from another country, I don't remember, they saw me there in the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. They saw me, hey, with great emotion. Never in my life I have been in something like this in my whole life. So to be honest with you, they made me cry when they told me that, because I prove it's not something that give the audience when they ask. That's a lie.
Right.
That's a lie. If you really change your content in mass media and you canalize that content in a good way of communication.
Right.
So, because in this case, Rolando Villazón, I interviewed him with Anna Netrebko, the very famous singer from Russia, who's beautiful. Yes. Google Anna Netrebko, she's fantastic. So, in that year, Consuelito Velázquez, the Mexican composer, Bésame, Bésame mucho, I mean, the Beatles sing that song. So he started singing the song to Anna. So, and I made like a story, a little bit like a soap opera, with the background of Romeo and Juliet, and was very human, very touching. So we can do that in mass media. We can give entertainment with quality. And now we have, in Mexican television, we have garbage. We have really to give an impulse to culture, as you said at the beginning of this, writers. And there's a vitality in culture in Mexico, but it's not in the mass media. It's football, soccer, of course, those kind of things, no? You know.
Yeah, those kinds of things, and agua fresca.
Okay. Yeah, it's very similar.
Ruben, I really want to thank you so much for joining us today and really giving us a deep insight into this snapshot, this moment in politics in Mexico. This is a critical moment. I really appreciate your insight.
One last thing. Please. It's important that American people, they don't think, what's going on in Mexico? Poor country, and people coming to here looking for no. You have to put it in context, not only for Mexico, for whole Latin America. You have, for instance, Guatemala back in 1954, when the president Jacobo Arbenz democratically elected in Guatemala. So he decided to do something to change the situation of the workers in the countryside in Guatemala. So, and he didn't like to the United States, you used to have in the CIA and the State Department the brothers Dulles, these brothers, and they made a coup d'etat against that president in Guatemala. And then different governments, they start supporting dictatorships in Guatemala, like this guy who just passed away recently. I forgot now his name. So Ronald Reagan was supporting those dictatorships. And suddenly, you don't want to see people coming from Guatemala to the United States. So really go to history to understand. In the case of Mexico, there are many situations in Mexico. But NAFTA was something to create, that was a factory of immigrants coming, looking for a job here. So people must be really more aware of the co-responsibility of different governments in the United States for the situation not only in Mexico, in Guatemala, in Central America, in Honduras now. They support a coup d'etat in Guatemala. It was Hillary Clinton, the president. Right. And then they support the last fraud elections in Guatemala also. So we have to pay attention to this.
We're not silos. We're all parts of a tree.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sorry for saying that.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you. And I really want to thank my guest, Ruben Luengas, for shedding real insight on what's happening in Mexico with the elections as well as the history of the region. Thank you so much, Ruben. If you want to follow me online, you can using the handle @JerryQuickley on Twitter. Again, that's @JerryQuickley on Twitter. This show is produced by myself and Jose Benavides. Our board operator is Kiana Williams. And that's it, y'all. Until tomorrow. You can also check us out on SoundCloud. Go to SoundCloud.com and check out all that This Is Happening Live. It's up there on SoundCloud. You can also check me out on Twitter. I post for that too. Anything you want. It's up there. Even more than it's here. That's it, y'all. Until tomorrow. Bye-bye.